The surf of the Pacific slammed against the coral reef, gray and angry beneath the morning haze. Landing craft clawed toward the beach, packed with Marines clutching rifles and Seabees gripping shovels, picks, and the levers of bulldozers. Overhead, smoke and salt filled the air. Japanese artillery barked from the ridgeline, and in the chaos, a voice crackled over the radio. "We're going in! Get those dozers ashore!" To the Japanese defenders watching from their bunkers, it was almost laughable. Americans bringing construction crews to a battlefield? What could they possibly build under fire? A pier? A shack? The enemy officers sneered, confident that within hours these so-called builders would be dead or cowering behind their tanks. But they were wrong. When the U.S. Navy created the construction battalions, the Seabees, in 1942, no one outside America truly understood what that meant. These weren't ordinary laborers. These were welders, miners, mechanics, heavy equipment operators, men who'd built America's cities, roads, and bridges before the war, and they were trained to fight just like Marines. Their motto said everything: we build, we fight. By the time the first waves hit Guadalcanal, Tarawa, and Saipan, the Seabees had one mission: turn chaos into an airfield before the enemy could react. Where the Japanese saw coral and jungle, the Seabees saw runways. Where they saw death traps, the Seabees saw opportunity. Under constant sniper fire and air raids, they drove bulldozers through minefields, leveled ground with coral, and laid down steel matting faster than anyone thought humanly possible. It wasn't just courage. It was speed, precision, and an unshakable will to build in the middle of hell. On islands where the Japanese had spent months constructing bunkers, the Seabees built entire airstrips in days. Sometimes while the ground still shook from bombardment, sometimes while bullets tore through the palms overhead. To the enemy, it seemed impossible. No one could build an operational airfield under direct fire. But to the Seabees, that was just another day on the job. They had one goal: make sure America's planes could land, refuel, and strike again tomorrow. By nightfall, what had been an empty stretch of blasted coral was now alive with engine noise and the glint of metal under moonlight. A control tower of scrap wood, a rough runway of pierced steel planking. But it worked. Within 24 hours, the first American fighters were already landing. For the Japanese Marines who had laughed that morning, the laughter died with the roar of those engines. The island they thought they could defend had just become an American fortress, built out of rubble, sweat, and defiance. The Seabees had proven something no one expected. You can't stop an army that knows how to build faster than you can destroy. By early 1943, the legend of the Seabees was spreading across the Pacific like wildfire. From the muddy jungles of Guadalcanal to the black volcanic sands of Iwo Jima, their arrival meant one thing: progress. Wherever they landed, within hours, something began to rise from the devastation. A road, a pier, an airstrip. And behind every one of those projects was a race against time. And against the Japanese guns that sought to annihilate them. The Seabees were not ordinary engineers. Most were middle-aged tradesmen, far older than the average infantryman. Some were fathers who had left their families behind. Others were master carpenters, miners, or shipyard workers who had never held a rifle before the war. But once they put on that Seabee patch, the cartoon bee carrying a wrench, a hammer, and a submachine gun, they became part of one of the most adaptable and fearless units of World War II. Their mission was brutally clear: build whatever was needed, wherever it was needed, no matter the cost. They were not expected to wait for victory. They were there to make victory possible. In the Pacific, The U.S. Navy's island-hopping campaign relied entirely on logistics. For every battle won by Marines or soldiers, it was the Seabees who turned those victories into forward operating bases. They carved airfields out of jungles, built docks for incoming ships, hospitals for the wounded, and barracks for thousands of troops. And they did it all while under constant attack. On Guadalcanal, their bulldozers worked side by side with Marines under artillery and sniper fire. When Japanese bombers strafed the beaches, the Seabees didn't run. They ducked behind their machinery, returned fire, and went right back to work. The men joked grimly that their bulldozers were the slowest tanks in the world. On Bougainville, they built bridges across rivers where crocodiles and enemy patrols made construction almost suicidal. On Tarawa, they repaired bombed-out causeways and rebuilt landing zones under fire so the next wave of troops could get ashore. On Saipan and Tinian, they achieved the impossible, transforming shell-blasted coral into vast airfields capable of launching B-29 superfortresses toward Japan itself. The Japanese commanders couldn't believe what they were seeing. Recon reports described American forces landing in the morning, and by evening, they already had supply lines, repair shops, and an operational runway. The enemy had never encountered such efficiency, such speed, such audacity. One Japanese officer reportedly wrote in disbelief, "They build faster than we can destroy." That was no exaggeration. The Seabees' ability to construct, repair, and fortify under combat conditions gave the U.S. military a decisive edge. Where traditional armies relied on securing territory before establishing bases, the Americans were building infrastructure as the battle raged, effectively creating instant strongholds out of chaos. Their methods were unorthodox but effective. They used captured Japanese materials, scavenged scrap metal, and repurposed damaged vehicles. When supplies ran low, they improvised, melting down shell casings into makeshift tools, converting wrecked tanks into bulldozers, and using bomb craters as foundations. By 1944, there were more than 250,000 Seabees deployed across the Pacific. Their presence meant the difference between victory and stalemate. Every time a new airfield was completed, American bombers could strike deeper into enemy territory, and every new harbor allowed the next island invasion to launch ahead of schedule. They were the unsung engine of the Allied advance, invisible in the headlines but indispensable on every map. And their legacy was written not just in steel and concrete, but in the dirt, blood, and sweat they left behind on every island they touched. As the campaign intensified, their reputation grew. The Japanese stopped mocking the Americans who came ashore with bulldozers. Instead, they learned to fear them, because wherever the Seabees built, defeat soon followed. By mid-1944, the U.S. Pacific Campaign had reached its most brutal phase, the Marianas. The islands of Saipan, Tinian, and Guam were the keys to Japan's doorstep, the final stepping stones for the massive B-29 bombers that would bring the war home to the Japanese mainland. But before that could happen, the U.S. needed airfields, and fast. That mission fell squarely on the shoulders of the Seabees. On June 15, 1944, the invasion of Saipan began under a blistering sun. The beaches were narrow, the terrain volcanic and uneven, and Japanese defenses dug deep into the ridges and cliffs. Artillery shells churned the surf, mortars screamed from hidden caves, and machine gun fire tore into the landing craft before they even hit the sand. But behind the Marines came the Seabees, men hauling bulldozers, graders, and trucks lashed to amphibious vehicles. ready to turn chaos into construction the moment the shooting paused. The first waves of Seabees came ashore under direct enemy fire. Some never made it off the beach, but those who did immediately began clearing debris and carving rough roads through the blackened coral. The Marines needed supply routes, and the Seabees delivered. Within 24 hours, tanks and artillery were rolling inland over newly cut paths built from the shattered remains of the shore. Even before the island was fully secured, construction teams began scouting sites for airfields. They picked an area near the village of Aslito, a captured Japanese strip, and began expanding it, while Japanese snipers and artillery still harassed them daily. The ground was rock-hard coral. The heat was unbearable, and enemy shells often landed just yards away. But the Seabees kept working. Bulldozers pushed night and day under floodlights, guarded by riflemen. When machinery broke down from overuse or shrapnel, the men cannibalized parts from wrecked Japanese vehicles to keep them running. Within 3 weeks, despite relentless attacks, the Seabees completed the Aslito airfield, soon renamed Islay Field. For the first time, long-range bombers could operate directly from the Marianas. But the true miracle came on Tinian, a smaller island just 3 miles away, chosen to become the main launching base for the air war against Japan. The Japanese considered Tinian impregnable. Its beaches were narrow, its cliffs steep, and its terrain heavily fortified. Yet the Seabees did what they always did. They found a way. They designed and built portable piers from steel pontoons, creating instant landing docks for tanks and trucks. They bulldozed access ramps onto beaches under fire, turning coral reefs into highways for invasion. Within days of the island's capture, construction began on 2 massive airfields, North Field and West Field, designed to handle hundreds of B-29 superfortresses. The scale was staggering. North Field alone stretched 8,500 feet, large enough to support the world's heaviest bombers. The Seabees moved millions of cubic yards of coral, filled craters, and laid down steel matting at a speed that stunned even U.S. command. Japanese resistance didn't stop them. When enemy infiltrators attacked at night, Seabees fought them off with rifles and machine guns, then went back to work before sunrise. They often worked 18-hour shifts, eating rations with one hand and running bulldozers with the other. Within 2 months, both airfields were complete, the largest forward bases ever built during the war. And from those very runways, American B-29s lifted off carrying missions that would devastate Japan's war industry, including the planes Enola Gay and Boxcar, which would later carry the atomic bombs to Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The Japanese had underestimated the Seabees at every turn. They thought construction units were weak, slow, and expendable. Instead, they met a force that combined the skill of engineers, the courage of infantry, and the endurance of machines. By the time the smoke cleared, the message was unmistakable. You could fight the Marines, but you could never outbuild the Seabees. By late 1944, the Pacific War was transforming from a desperate island-to-island crawl into a relentless march toward Japan itself. Every victory, Saipan, Tinian, Guam, Iwo Jima, Okinawa, carried one constant presence behind the front lines: the Seabees. They were there before the fighting stopped, and they stayed long after the smoke cleared, turning the wreckage of battle into the foundations of the next advance. The scale of their work was staggering. Across the Pacific, they built 111 major airstrips, 441 piers, 2,500 camps, and more than 700 square miles of roads. They laid millions of tons of concrete and steel, transforming jungles and coral atolls into cities of war. Their operations stretched from the sweltering jungles of Guadalcanal to the volcanic ash of Iwo Jima and the typhoon-racked beaches of Okinawa. On Iwo Jima, the Seabees' courage reached its peak. As Marines fought inch by inch up Mount Suribachi, Seabees landed alongside them, often with their bulldozers still lashed to the decks of landing craft. The volcanic sand made construction nearly impossible. Soft, shifting, and unable to support heavy loads. Yet, under sniper fire and artillery bombardment, they began grading airstrips just hours after securing a beachhead. It was on that brutal rock that the Seabees helped carve out Motoyama Airfield No. 1, which, by March 4, 1945, just 8 days after D-Day on Iwo Jima, was ready to receive its first emergency landing. A B-29 bomber returning from Tokyo, engines failing, fuel nearly gone. That plane, and thousands after it, owed their survival to the men who refused to stop building, even while shells exploded around them. The Seabees weren't driven by medals or fame. Their pride came from results. Each airstrip they built meant more bombers returning home. Each pier they completed meant faster resupply for the Marines. Each road they carved meant wounded men evacuated before nightfall. Their ingenuity was unmatched. When supplies ran short, they scavenged parts from destroyed Japanese equipment. When coral dust choked their engines, they invented new air filters on the spot. When tropical rains washed away their progress, they rebuilt twice as fast. The Seabees turned adaptation into an art form. On Okinawa, the final and bloodiest battle of the Pacific, their role reached its climax. Japanese artillery turned the beaches into a slaughter zone, yet Seabees still pushed forward. They built causeways for landing craft, storage depots for ammunition, and massive hospitals that could hold 25,000 wounded. Despite constant shelling, they restored roads and ports faster than the enemy could destroy them. The price was heavy. Hundreds of Seabees were killed or wounded during construction, not by accident, but in combat. Their casualty rates rivaled some infantry units. Yet, their spirit never wavered. One commanding officer wrote, "The Seabees did not ask for rest. They asked for more tools." As the war's end drew near, the Japanese finally realized the truth. The Americans' greatest weapon wasn't just firepower or manpower. It was the ability to build faster than war could destroy. Every landing was followed by a fortress. Every victory was cemented, paved, and supplied within days. And it wasn't just logistics. The Seabees' work was psychological. For the Marines and soldiers fighting on the front lines, seeing the Seabees roll ashore meant hope. It meant food, shelter, air support, and a way home. On every battlefield, those bulldozers were as symbolic as tanks. Proof that the U.S. wasn't just taking ground, it was keeping it. By mid-1945, as Allied forces prepared for the invasion of Japan, Seabees were already constructing massive air bases on Okinawa, sprawling complexes that could handle entire bomber fleets and thousands of aircraft. The war ended before the invasion was needed, but the bases were there, ready. The Seabees had done their job. They had built the road to victory, one island at a time, one airstrip at a time, one beam of steel at a time, under fire, under pressure, and under conditions no ordinary builders could have survived. When the guns finally fell silent in August 1945, and the Pacific skies cleared of smoke and ash, the Seabees stood among the quiet ruins of their own triumph. They were not generals or strategists. They were not the soldiers in the headlines or the faces on recruiting posters. Yet without them, victory would have been impossible. Across the Pacific, from the Solomons to Okinawa, their work remained as a silent monument to what determination, skill, and unity can achieve under fire. Runways, ports, and bases they built in the most unforgiving terrain on Earth became the foundation for the post-war world, many of them still in use decades later. Historians often call the Seabees the men who built the way to victory. But for the Marines and soldiers who fought beside them, they were something even more profound. Brothers in arms who turned destruction into progress, who could build under bombardment, and who reminded everyone that war wasn't just about fighting, it was about endurance, creation, and willpower. In total, over 325,000 Seabees served during World War II. Their combined work laid down more than 400 advanced bases across the globe. They helped launch invasions, saved lives, and built the backbone of America's global reach. They were proof that victory in modern warfare depended not only on courage, but on logistics, and that the power to build was as deadly as the power to destroy. Even after the war, their spirit lived on. The Seabees became a permanent branch of the U.S. Navy, serving in every major conflict since, from Korea and Vietnam to Iraq and Afghanistan, and their motto remains unchanged. We build, we fight. When people think of World War II heroes, they picture pilots, infantrymen, or tank crews. But the Seabees, those builders who fought with bulldozers and rifles, deserve a place among them. They carried no glory in their tools, yet every bolt they turned, every runway they laid, every bridge they built was a step toward freedom. Their story is a reminder that true strength lies not only in destruction, but in creation, in the courage to build hope amid devastation. The Japanese Marines who once mocked them learned that lesson too late. Because in war, those who can build under fire will always outlast those who can only fight. So, the next time you see a photograph of American bombers taking off toward Japan, or Marines landing on some distant shore, remember the Seabees, the men who made it possible. If this story moved you, if you believe courage isn't only about pulling a trigger, but also about never stopping when the world is collapsing around you, then subscribe to WWII Heroes Legends. Because here, we tell the real stories of bravery, sacrifice, and humanity. The stories that built victory from the ashes of war. Like, share, and subscribe. And join us as we keep the legacy of World War II's forgotten heroes alive.